This is a tutorial to go along with Chapter 7, which is about void functions and using reference parameters rather than value parameters. Remember that value parameters pass values in normally to a function, and the function can return only one value. A void function, on the other hand, can change multiple memory locations if you're using reference parameters, because they point back to where the variable was declared in memory and I'm not passing a copy of it in. In this particular program, we're reading the data from a text file, and here's the text file, which reads a first name, a last name, a pay rate, the number of hours worked, as well as a tax rate for 5 employees. I've taken the liberty again of starting the program so that we don't have to see everything keyed in, but there's not much new here yet. I've got my header files here, including fstream, since I'm reading from a file, and then down in main I'm declaring all of my variables, opening up my data file, payroll.input.txt. I've set up my numeric precision as well as printed a header line for my output that'll go to the screen. Then, because I have 5 employees, I've set up a for loop that's going to actually read all 5, and I'm reading them in from the file, and I'm going to accumulate gross pay in a total gross variable and net pay in total net. Then I'm printing a detail line for each of the individuals in my text file. Right now, gross pay and net pay are just going to give me zeros because that's what I'm going to calculate in the functions, and they're not in the program yet. And then there'll be a totals line at the very end. I can build this now and then actually execute it, but you're going to see that the output gives us zeros for those 2 calculations because we don't have the functions in here yet, but everything else is working. So I've got the program stubbed, and I'm ready now to go on and actually build the functions. So I'm going to come up to the top and place the prototype statements, which tell the compiler not to flag anything that's here because it will follow at the end of the main C function. So my first one here is a void function called calcGross, which takes us parameters double, double, and a reference to a double, which uses the ampersand. That indicates that it is a reference parameter and it's not being passed by value, but rather it's a pointer pointing back to where the variable is stored in memory. My second function is called calcNet, where again I am passing to it a double, and both of these are by value because there is no ampersand, and the third one uses an ampersand because it is a reference pointer, a reference parameter, excuse me. So these are my prototype statements for my function. Now I'm going to come down underneath my main function and actually set up the functions themselves. So the first one was void calcGross, and it was passed a double that I'm going to call rate. So I'm passing in rate first as a value, then double hours, and I'm passing that as a value, and then the last one is gross pay, which I'm actually changing here in the function, so I need to be sure that the ampersand is there to let C know that it is a reference parameter. No semicolon at the end of a function heading. The function body is enclosed inside the braces, and what I'm asking here is if hours are less than or equal to 40, meaning they didn't work overtime, then the gross pay is simply equal to the rate times the hours. However, if they worked overtime, then my calculation changes a little. So I'm going to do that gross pay is equal to rate times 40, which is the first 40 hours at standard rate. Then I have to use this calculation, hours minus 40 times rate times 1.5, which would give me time and a half. And that's the end of my calculation. And I have to use a return, but it doesn't return anything except control back to where it's called in the main program, and then I have to close my function block with a corresponding brace. So here's my function body, my function heading, my function prototype, and my call statement will go right here for gross pay. So I'm going to put it in, and it simply stands as a line by itself, and IntelliSense will tell me what it is I need to pass. Rate, hours, both as value parameters, and gross, but you don't ever put the ampersand again. The compiler knows what to do with it. So I'm going to build it again to see if I'm still on track with no errors, and I am. So this time if I run it, I at least get my gross pay, but net's not in there yet. So one more function, and I'm going to come down underneath gross and actually put in the function for the net pay, which is very similar to setting up the gross pay function, except the parameters are different, and it's a little simpler calculation. I'm passing it a double the tax rate as read in from my file. I also need gross pay, and then my reference parameter, which is what I'm calculating here, so it has to have the ampersand, net pay. And that should match in data type and in order to my prototype statement, double, double, and a reference double. So it does, and it is a function, so it starts with a open curly brace, and net pay will be equal to gross pay minus gross pay excuse me, times tax rate, which will calculate the amount of the tax and subtract it from gross pay. And I did use a little bit longer calculation there so you could see what was happening. Then return, but it doesn't return anything except control to the main program. So it's in, and I'm ready to add the statement right here that calls that particular function, which is called calc net. And again, IntelliSense will help me along here. Tax rate, gross pay, net pay. And I'm going to build it. Remember that the source code is in the folder for the videos so that you can look at it. Got some errors here. It is flagging an unrecognized characters sequence here, but I don't see it. And the tax rate here, yes, I did not put the capital R there. And that was the only thing flagging the error. So let's run it and see what we get. And we do get the net pay. So you can actually see how it actually works. So that's void functions with reference parameters.